Good morning. I'm so glad to be with you. I'm Pastor Christine Cunningham, and I am from the Illinois Great Rivers Conference and barely here in Albuquerque for a year and here at St. John's for just about that amount of time. So glad to be with you, and I have been so thankful for Josh's sermon series here during the summer that talks about the various stories in your stained glass windows. I don't know how many of you know this, but in the cathedrals in Europe, the stained glass that is there that have stories in them, they were there in order to help the people sitting in the pew learn the stories of the faith so that they might be formed by them because they didn't read. And so I don't know how many of you have really looked at and pondered and meditated on the various stories. So Josh has done this one of creation, and then last week he did this one with Abraham and Sarah and his nephew Lot. That will come into a little bit of play if I remember to put it in the story. And then we skip the 10 Commandments. And we're down here, this fourth one on this side. And we've got a little bit of it up here. So if you can't see it, there is what at the top of this stained glass window? A rainbow. But this is not the story of Noah, right? And so, but there's some kind of promise in this story that a lot of times doesn't really kind of get talked about. I want you to notice in the one up at the front, or wherever you are on the screens, it doesn't include the sheaves of grain. And actually, grain is a big deal in this story, as are the names. Just knowing the meaning of the names, so Josh talked about this a little bit last week about the name of Abraham, etc. And actually, this story depends a lot on the meaning of the names. So just to kind of get a feel for the room, I think this is a chicken and egg story. So I need to know, how many of you think the chicken came first? Raise your hand. Don't be shy. Raise your hand if you think the chicken came first. Not very many of you. How many of you think it's an egg deal? The egg came first. Okay. Well, I know some of you didn't vote. So I don't know if you're really mad about the egg prices or if it is that you don't know. How many of you just don't know? Raise your hand if I haven't asked this question. Okay, so some of you just don't know and you're not willing to commit. Well, at least you're willing to say, I don't know. That's an important thing, important skill in life. So the reason I wonder about this is because of these names. Which comes first, the chicken or the egg? Which comes first? A kid receives this name and they live into the characteristic, or right out of the womb, or 8 days later, or whatever it might be, the parents look at that kid and they say, he's a, or she's a, and they fill in the blank. Like, which is it? So let's just start with the name of the father. So it's Elimelech. However you want to pronounce it. I pronounce it Joe. So, because I sometimes have trouble, maybe you don't, but with the biblical names, sometimes I have trouble. So Elimelech means, my God is king. But that seems like a very appropriate Israelite name to me. The name Naomi means pleasant. Now, come on, gentlemen. Do you think she was always pleasant? Probably not. I know I'm not always pleasant. Any others willing to fess up to that kind of thing? Yeah, not always pleasant, are we, ladies? So there we are. So this is where things get kind of sticky. I mean, truly. I know there's some weird names out there today. And you know, sometimes a mom picks out a name, and especially for a little boy, and dad says, we are not naming that. Because when he's 7 years old and on the playground, he's going to get whooped, right? Names matter. Names matter. So I want to know what kind of a parent has a child pop out of the womb and they name them Mahlon, which means weak or sickly. Okay? What kind of a parent, even with the second kid, maybe I don't know which one came first, but in the scriptures it's Chilion, and it means wasting away. Who does that to their kid? But we do know that in the story, what happens with those two? They die before their time. They die before their time, as does Elimelech. And in doing so, they leave 3 widowed women behind. Now, women, a lot of you probably would have gone out and got a job. That just wasn't possible back then. You had to have a male protector, a son, a husband, someone from your husband's family, someone to look out for you. I'm thinking, ain't no man looking out after me. But that's just me. So here we are. This whole family has moved from Bethlehem. Where else in the scriptures do we have the city of Bethlehem? Anybody? You laugh. What is it? Jesus' birthplace, the nativity scene out of Luke 1. Out of Luke. And so the word Bethlehem means house of bread. Thank you, Sarah. She says I'm right. I love it when a parishioner, a congregant, someone in the pew says, "You're right." I'm not always. So, house of bread. Isn't it ironic that at the house of bread we have a famine? There is no bread. Now, how many of you, there might be somebody in this room, who has literally lived through a food famine? Has anybody ever lived through a food famine? Raise your hand if you have. A unique experience. Unique experience in the United States, at least these days, right? Most of us we would do with a famine, maybe. Right? Yeah, I'm squeezing my little bit of fat there. So, famine. But there's more than one kind of famine in life, isn't there? Have you ever had a spiritual famine and you wonder, where is God? Have you ever had a relationship famine? Anybody? Maybe you are on the outs with your best friend, or maybe you have a wayward child that you just can't figure out. Here's mine right here. Yeah, wave at her. Yeah. Say, "Hi, Nat." Sometimes we have relationship famines. Sometimes we have work famines. Any of you ever been let go from a job? Yeah. So at the opening of the Iraq War, my husband, who is not my husband now, but was my husband at the time, got laid off from McDonnell Douglas in St. Louis. They dumped thousands upon thousands of extremely qualified workers onto the economy of St. Louis, Missouri. Took months, literally months, to find a job. And there were times when I was afraid to come home from work that I had taken up to help. I didn't know, he was so depressed. It was like, has he looked for a job today? There were times when I even wondered if in coming home I would find that he had taken his life. There's famine out there, people. You have experienced, at least some of you have, and there are surely people beyond these walls who are experiencing it, right? Absolutely. Famine. These people had run from their place where they had lived, had friends, had a support system, and went to, of all places, Moab. Now, the Moabs were related to the Israelite people. Remember last week when we talked about Abraham and Sarah and the nephew Lot? The Moabite people had come out of how shall I say it? An inappropriate relationship between Lot and his daughter. And they worshiped not Yahweh, but they worshiped a war god by the name of Chemosh. I'm sure that's not how you pronounce it. Who, in the practice, the people presumed demanded, in order for him to act on their behalf, needed to have child sacrifice. Well, by this time, the Israelites are like, like, no. So it was kind of this, you ever have this in your family? This kind of love-hate relationship? You know, Uncle Joe's clan over there, they're just a little bit, like, weird. And sometimes when you gather for that family dinner, it's like the eye roll. And you have to try not to talk about certain things. And you just walk on eggs. A few of you are nodding your heads like you know exactly what I'm talking about. It was that way with the Moabites and the Israelites. Sometimes it was pretty cozy, and other times. But it's a famine. What do you do in a famine? You go and you do what you have to do in order to survive. So they run to Moab, and they're there, and Elimelech has the audacity to die. And here is mom. She's trying to figure out it's a famine. I'm not in the place where I know people. How the boys are getting to be that age. They need to be married. And so she arranges marriages likely for them with 2 Moabite women. They're really not supposed to mix marriage like that. You remember those days? No mixed marriage. But they do it because it's famine. So here they are. We marry Orpah, not Oprah, Orpah. And we marry Ruth. Okay? So what do those weird names mean? Ruth, we hear Ruth all the time. Orpah, not so much. So it's Orpah. Both girls, both women want to go with Ruth to her people. Now I want to know, how is it that Elimelech and his whole clan that went down there to Moab, what kind of a life were they living out in their faith that causes 2 Moabite women to be willing to leave their homeland, everything that they know, in order to move with her? What if they, they don't know anything about Israel except for what they've experienced through these folks. It makes me wonder, how are we living our lives in order to attract people? Do you know what the outside, have you just noticed? Let me ask you this first. How many of you have noticed that? There just aren't as many people going to church as there used to be. Anybody notice it? Raise your hand if you've noticed. Okay, most of you have noticed. You know what the outside world says about us as church? We are hateful, divisive, judgmental, and mostly concerned about money. Whoa. I don't know about you, but as a pastor, that's a blow. Are they all finding out when we do our seasonal, our in the fall money campaign or what? And they all come on the same pledge Sunday? I don't know what's happening, but that's what they think about us. What did Elimelech's family do in order to be attractive to these people that they wanted to take on that kind of an adventure? And what if we began to live out our faith in such a way that people were curious about what we had to offer and who this Jesus is? So Orpah, her name means, get this, back of the neck. Cool, back of the neck. Or maybe gazelle. But this is why they say back of the neck. What do you see as you're walking away from Ruth and Naomi, and you're on your way home to your mother's household? What do you see? The back of the neck. Wow. How did her parents know that? That's what I want. Anyway, whatever. Ruth, very obviously, it really fits her. It means friend, friendship, compassionate friend. Usually when you hear this passage, that would be what the center of the sermon would be. Not for me, but most times that's what you would hear. So Ruth's name and Orpah's name are very appropriate. Orpah decides to stay home. There is no shame in that. Yeah, there's no shame in that. I was about to shame her, but no. Sometimes we are of a mind that we're not going to take that risk. We're not going to go on the adventure. We want to just stay at home. There are adventures at home, but not like going to Bethlehem, where you don't know anybody but your mother-in-law. You maybe don't know the language. And Naomi herself doesn't even know how those people are going to be accepting her. Right? So I know a man whose mother, she's older. But her family was from the original Prussia. Like, she immigrated to the U.S. But as a girl, she grew up in what was original Prussia. And they were agricultural people who raised probably grain. And towards the end of the war, this family didn't have their father because they didn't really know where he was, because he was a professor of agriculture, and the government had kind of come and taken him to help somewhere else grow whatever they were growing, right? So the rest of the family went back to the family in the homeland and said, would you please help us to get back on our feet, to put our lives back together? And they said, no. 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 What would that feel like? Well, I can tell you, even to this day, they do communicate via letter, and maybe, I don't know, they might get together once in a while. But it is awkward. Everybody is walking on eggshells because of that breach that happened. What happens if Naomi and Ruth go back after 10 plus years and they say, what are you doing here? We're not going to help you get yourselves back on your feet. These women are actually in danger because you had to have a man to oversee you, to be your protector, to provide for you. We got two widows showing up on the doorstep, and is the community going to say no, or are they going to say yes? Come on in. Luckily, they belong to a community, or Naomi had, that said yes. Oh my gosh, what does it feel to be said yes to? Anybody? What does it feel like? Great. Feels great. Anybody else? What? Safe. Oh my gosh, yes. So in this time frame, in this part of the world, women, again, they were at risk. And I was going to go somewhere with that, and now I have forgotten. So there was Elimelech, and he died. His brother was required by Jewish law to take on Naomi and any other women folk to support them, to become this protectorate kind of man in their lives. Okay, and there was someone there in Bethlehem who fulfilled that. But he was not the one who kind of got involved in this story. Instead, it's the second person who's qualified to do that kind of catches on. So we get to Bethlehem, and I don't know if you know this, ladies, But we have sometimes had to use our feminine wiles just to survive. Just to survive. Are you hearing me? Just to survive. And that's what Naomi does in this story. She knows that Boaz is related to them and that he might be a good match for Ruth. And so she just keeps coaching Ruth on how to catch Boaz's attention. And guess what? It works. Ladies, those feminine wiles sometimes work. Some of you have caught your husband sitting right there next to you, just like that. It's almost a shame that we have to do that, but especially in this time frame, we had to do that. Couldn't you go out and get a job at Walmart or at Sandia or the White House or any of those things? Okay, so she is looking out. So when they get to Bethlehem, one of the things that happens is that, those friends that come and encircle Naomi and such, she says, no longer will you call me Ruth. Naomi, thank you. Naomi, which means pleasant. You're to call me Mara, which is after the springs of the bitter springs at Mara. So Mara means bitter. Anybody know anybody bitter? Do you know any bitter people? Have you ever been bitter? Oh my gosh, well somebody knows you. So, bitterness, it's out there and it shapes your whole worldview, right? Now, what's interesting is that even though Naomi is now Mara and wants to be known as bitter, she's self-identifying as being bitter. She doesn't get so caught up in it that she refuses to help. She does. She becomes this can you imagine it? A Jewish mother matchmaker. Right? She becomes that so that they can survive. So she sets all this up, and he's the owner of a lot of grain fields. He's part of this bringing Bethlehem, the house of bread, back to its fullness and meaning. Now, this caught my attention this time when I was preparing for this. Bethlehem, house of bread, birthplace of who? Jesus. And in the book of John, the very bread of life. Now, tell me, people, is that a coincidence? No. That's why there's that rainbow in that window. A promise. The promise. And that's what we need to remember in this story, is that by the time we get to the end, Boaz and Ruth are married. And they bear a child by the name of Obed, which means servant. But Obed is in the line of King David. It's just a few generations. We're going to end up with King David. And many generations in the future, we're going to end up with who? Jesus. So I'm going to put a disclaimer right here. I believe that no matter what, God would have made it possible for Jesus to live among us. Okay? So at the dinner, sometimes at the Sunday morning table when we're eating that roast, every Sunday morning, that roast that my mom made, she would sometimes sit down and say, what would have happened if Mary had said no? Just no. I mean, what God asks of her is a pretty big deal, like no. And she would then ask, had there been other women, other Marys that had been approached that said, no? See, I think God's going to make it possible. But I want to just ask you, what if? What if? What if Elimelech's clan went down there to Moab and didn't live this life of faith that attracted these two women to Naomi, and there was no one to go back with her? What if we're living lives that don't attract the curiosity of people out there beyond these walls? Because let me tell you, with the descriptors, that's exactly what we're doing. What if we were to turn around and begin to live lives that were attractive, didn't have those pretty negative characteristics to them? What if when they got there, the community, like this Prussian family, said, no, we're not receiving you back? Now, I can tell you here at St. John's, I've only been here a year, but I've been to some meetings. Oh my gosh, meetings, churches, it's the same thing, right? Meetings, and I've been to choir practice, and I've been to Sunday school. And this is a lot of what I hear sometimes is, so-and-so who went here for 25 years and had to move away to Timbuktu, they're back. They may be back for only 1 week. They may be back here for the duration. And you know what you people say? Wow, that is wonderful and marvelous. I have not heard one time, oh, we don't want them back. But woe to the church, because there are some that would say just that. I've pastored some of them. It's true. They are out there. So thanks be to God for St. John's attitude. But what if we were not a welcoming congregation? What if Boaz, so what happens here at the end of the story is that Boaz, the second in line, so remember how I told you names were important in this story? The first person who could take responsibility for Naomi and Ruth is a man who is unnamed. Isn't that interesting? That's usually the women. Women in the Bible a lot of times are not named. They don't even get the dignity of having a name or the power of having a name. And here's this guy, and Boaz goes to him and says, hey, look, we got these gals here in town, and you're responsible. And he takes a look at Ruth, and he's like, ooh la la, okay, I'll step up and take that responsibility. He says, well, you just need to know that it involves the mother-in-law, who's no longer pleasant. Uh-oh. All of a sudden he's saying, no, I can't take on that responsibility. He blames it on money. How many of you men knowingly took on a bitter woman? Yeah, it doesn't happen, right? So, he says no. And Boaz says, well, if you're not going to, I will. It was not his responsibility. So, what if Boaz hadn't done that? And Obed had never been born? And let's just presume that God doesn't always follow through. He says, oh, well, that didn't work out, and so I'm just going to give up. What if the people in pews in churches everywhere didn't say things like, when asked to do something, have you ever been asked to do something at the church? This is a lot of what I hear when you go to ask somebody to do something at the church. Well, Pastor, I did VBS when my kids were young, and I think we should just let the young people, the young adults do it. Not my responsibility anymore. Or I hear, Pastor, somebody else can do it. You know what, though? When I talk to the somebody else that's sitting on your right, they say, well, somebody else can do it. And when I talk to somebody sitting on your left, guess what they say? All together now. Somebody else. Who is this somebody else? I do not find them in the directory. People, we have been letting somebody else that doesn't exist live out our faith, help at the church, get beyond these walls. But what if, like Boaz, we took on those responsibilities that we might look at and say, not mine to do. What couldn't we do if we lived into those what ifs? What couldn't we do if we lived into those what ifs?